Hitler rose to power in 1933. Things became increasingly difficult for Jews in Germany. Jewish children are denied schooling, marginalized, and treated as outcasts. First, some background. Goodbye from Berlin is Jeffery Giesener's father's story of his escape from Nazi Berlin through the Hadassah Youth Aliyot children's program, founded in 1933 by Recha Freier. At its start, the program transported dozens of children out of Berlin to Palestine, and at its height, thousands of children were saved from the Third Reich. First, I would like to introduce my father, Rolf Giesener, of blessed memory, pictured here in 1935 at 15. This photo was his official Youth Aliyot document photo. This picture is my father at 28, when he fought in the War of Independence in 1948.
From their rise to power to the murder of 6 million European Jews in the Holocaust, the Nazis relied on a powerful weapon: propaganda.
Germany, 1933. The Nazi Party, led by Adolf Hitler, seizes control of the democratic Weimar Republic. The country is transformed overnight into a police state. Basic rights and freedoms are revoked. The first concentration camps are established, imprisoning political opponents, homosexuals, and Jehovah's Witnesses. Hitler creates a propaganda campaign based on the purity and superiority of the Aryan race. His racist ideology infiltrated every level of society. Jews are labeled as impure and are excluded from mainstream German society. They are randomly attacked in the streets. The Nazi Party calls for a boycott of Jewish stores and businesses. On September 15, 1935, the German parliament passed the Nuremberg Laws. The Nuremberg Laws makes racism, and in particular anti-Semitism, legal in Germany. German Jews are stripped of their citizenship. Relations between Jews and non-Jews are forbidden. Jews cannot employ non-Jews.
Before the Nazis came to power, there was really no Jewish problem. If you're looking at the Jewish world in 1933, and you're looking at Britain, you look at France, you look at Germany, and you ask what would be the best place to live as a Jew, you would say Germany.
What we understand in the 30s, this split between the Jews and the German society hadn't begun in terms of a psyche of us and them.
Following World War I, a democratic regime was instituted in Germany, the Weimar Republic, which had perhaps the most liberal democratic constitution in the world.
Germany had given Jews political rights as citizens, and the Jews had jumped into that with both feet. They became very active politically. They joined political parties. Jews became disproportionately influential in the professions. They had more doctors, they had more lawyers, they had more judges, they had more journalists, they had more university professors than their 1% of the population would have suggested.
But the Weimar Republic and the constitution that created it were extremely unpopular in Germany. In the elections that brought the Nazis to power, these were the elections of November 1932, 58% of the German electorate, people of their own free will, voted against democracy in the last more or less free election in Germany.
Immediately after Hitler came to power in January 1933, the Enabling Act was passed, which gave the right to Hitler's cabinet to enact laws without the consent of Parliament. This gave Hitler dictatorial powers over the entire country.
By the time that the laws were passed, Germany was no longer even remotely resembling a democratic society.
What happened in 1935 was that there were many so-called spontaneous violent acts against Jews.
Hitler allowed the brown shirts, which was his thuggery, his militia, to go out into the streets and cause street violence. They would beat up Jews, they would rob Jews, they would stand in front of shops owned by Jews, they would break those windows, they would rape young Jewish girls.
The country was drifting into anarchy.
Nazis realized that in order to create a new reality for the Jews in Germany, it would have to be through legislation.
The Nuremberg Laws were drafted in a matter of hours, and they were presented the next day at the 1935 annual Nazi rally in Nuremberg.
In a sense, these laws came as a calming moment of that violence against the Jews and pressure on the Jews, and ostensibly came to organize society so that Jews and everyone else in Germany knows who everybody is and where they belong. There are the Aryans, all those people in Germany who are citizens of Germany, and there are the Jews who are not citizens but have a right to live in Germany under certain circumscribed circumstances.
One of the geniuses of this policy, because it's actually fusing something that's rational, legislation, with something irrational, which is xenophobia.
These laws set out to deny Jews in Germany their citizenship, regardless of how long a particular Jew had been living in Germany or that person's family. And the laws ultimately defined citizenship in Germany based upon who a person's grandparents were by race. And therefore, anyone who had even one Jewish grandparent could no longer be a citizen of Germany.
Sexual relations between Jews and Aryans was considered a crime, because sexual relations between Jews and Aryans obviously violated racial principles and would produce children who would be in some way carriers of the Jewish gene.
The Nuremberg Laws separate the Jews out of German society, and with that a sense of indifference is engendered, which ultimately would lead to, a sense of indifference to the Jewish fate at later stages of Nazi policy.
The idea that Jews are not equal to the rest of the German people, the idea that Jews should not be equal citizens, the idea that there should be a social separation legislated in Germany seemed to be at least unobjectionable to almost everybody else in Germany, and no one spoke out.
The very famous case is of a lawyer who, one of his clients was a Jewish owner of a department store. And this lawyer goes to the police office where his client is held, and he protests. And immediately is beaten up by SS men. And then he's paraded through the streets. He's carrying a big sign that says, "I'm a lawyer and I will never complain to the police again." No other lawyer went then to the police to basically argue on his behalf, and he didn't do it after that anymore.
The Nuremberg crimes were really the crimes of the Nuremberg elites, judges and lawyers and faith leaders and educators. The society that should have been engaged in protesting against the Nuremberg racism were the elites and the society that in effect were promulgating this hate and promulgating these laws.
When the Nuremberg Laws were passed in 1935, they were not passed, as far as almost all historians now agree, with any intention or any vision of the future that there would be a murder of all the Jews, an attempt at what the Nazis later called the final solution to the Jewish question. However, these laws ultimately served as the foundation for determining all policies against Jews, and that included, as time went on, also killing the Jews.
For years, the Nazis had spread the lie that Jews were to blame for Germany's decline. Now their policy was to stamp out that Jewish influence. Books by Jewish authors were burnt. Jewish civil servants, lawyers, doctors lost their jobs and suffered public humiliation. For Germany's Jewish community, the basic right just to live and enjoy life like anyone else was suddenly under threat. They were ordinary Germans through and through, but now they'd been picked out. branded un-German, an enemy within.
This is how it started. Germany 1933. Hitler comes to power. Brutality, violence, the burning of holy Jewish books, and later the burning of Jews.
The proclamation, while stormtroopers guarded the doors, Henrietta Zold stood in a Berlin meeting hall. She had come in the name of Youth Aliyot, the youth immigration movement that had begun to move the menaced children of Europe to Palestine. She talked to men and women whose destinies were already measured in blood. She told them that their children would not die. Sorrowful Jews crowded around her, begging for news of boys and girls they had sent to Palestine at the risk of their lives. They wanted to know if their sons and daughters were safe and well. Henrietta Zold comforted each of them. Her face and voice were their only hope when nothing remained but terror. She went from there blessed by their gratitude. She knew that she would never see them again. The first boatload arrived at the port of Haifa in February 1934. There were 44 boys and girls facing a strange and frightening adventure. None was older than 17. They had left behind them the only friends they knew. Henrietta Zold met them at the harbor.
The first group to escape from Germany arrives on the shores of the Holy Land.
Rolf Giesener, only age 15, and just 2 months after the September 15th, 1935 Nuremberg Laws were passed, was denied schooling and all of his rights as a Jew. Rolf and his parents saw what was developing in Berlin under Hitler's anti-Jewish state and were desperate to have Rolf escape from Nazi Berlin. His mother insisted that Rolf's father, Alfred, place Rolf on the year's last Hadassah Youth Aliyot Kindertransport, leaving Berlin in December 1935. As a decorated soldier of distinction in World War I, Rolf shared a memory of going with his father to get papers to leave Germany. He was able to walk ahead of everyone in line because his father had served in World War I with distinction. Until his 91st birthday, he remembers with emotion, walking hand in hand with his father past all the Jews in line to go to the head of line to obtain his papers, and secured Rolf's official papers to leave Berlin. He and 100 other Berliner teenagers went by train to Italy and boarded the ship Galilea to Port Haifa, Palestine. Rolf was one of the first Hadassah Youth Transports offered desperately to get Jewish youth out of Germany. The 100 teenagers arrived in February 1936.
Henrietta Zold is there to meet them.
And here they were. She gave them life and all that goes with a mother's gift. She was with them in joy and in sorrow. She shared their work and their play. Their celebrations were hers. Their victories were her reward. She asked no other. In 1935, she had stood before a Zionist Congress in Lucerne, reporting on Youth Aliyot. In that same year, she went to America.
We have already brought out of Germany into Palestine 1,000 boys and girls between the ages of 15 and 17, from a land in which they could not attend school into a land in which they have fine educational opportunities, from a land in which they cannot pursue trades into a land in which they are taught trades, from a land in which they are repressed into a land in which they are given the opportunity of full self-expression. Palestine is, in that respect, comparable to America, to the United States. As in the United States, our young people look forward to a life of usefulness, so in Palestine, these young people repressed in Germany are able to make for themselves a sphere of usefulness, a sphere of noble citizenship.
Before we get started, a little bit of vocabulary which will make things a little easier to understand, and I won't have to stop in the middle and explain. Two German words which become important in this topic. The first is Reichsvertretung. That is the Reich's representation of German Jews. That was what we would call the Kehillah, or a kind of a Judenrat. It was a representative body representing all the Jewish communities in Germany. After Kristallnacht, it was reorganized, and there was a change of name. And the new name is Reichsvereinigung, which means the Association of Jews in Germany. Notice the subtle difference. It's no longer German Jews, but it's Jews in Germany. And that's reflective of the change of status of Jews in Germany. And so now we go to the Youth Aliyot in Germany. Before the rise of Nazis to power, and even in the first few years of Nazi domination, most German Jews simply didn't believe that the Nazis would last. Hitler seemed like a buffoon, like a crazy man, and people thought that it was an aberration of history that would very soon pass. One of the few German Jews who quickly saw the Nazis as an existential threat was Recha Freier. Wife of a congregational rabbi in Berlin, she saw as early as 1932 that there was no future for Jewish youth in Germany. After trying in vain to secure jobs for a group of young Jews who had finished their schooling, she formulated a bold plan, and it's just something that came to her one night. She was inspired by this idea to create, as she said, a great and permanent movement for the transfer of Jewish youth from the diaspora to the Palestinian colonies, to enable them to live and to take root in the soil of their fatherland. Although German Jewish leaders of the Reichsvertretung were skeptical of this idea, this was something brand new, untested, untried. How do you send German youth to be agricultural colonists? No, send them to the university, teach them a trade, but to be agriculturists? Young German Jews, however, were enthusiastic. As Recha Freier said, on the very day the Nazis took office, 30th of January 1933, the Society for Youth Aliyot was established in Berlin, not without a lot of toil and trouble on the part of Recha Freier. She not only invented the idea, but she invented the organization. Single-handedly, she drummed up support, and she created an organization of people who supported her. In March 1933, Rabbi Leo Beck, who was the head of the Reichsvertretung, called all the leaders of Jewish communities to meet to discuss a program of action. It was their responsibility to oversee whatever happened to the Jews in Germany from the Jewish perspective. He told them, "We must face the reality of a Nazi-ruled Germany and endeavor to work out a twofold plan: emigration for young people and the maintenance of the cultural and spiritual life of the remaining Jewish community." So he agreed that they have to help the young people get out. And this, again, was contrary to the general opinion that Nazism was a passing phenomenon. Recha Freier said, "The idea of Youth Aliyot, based as it was in rooting young Jews in Palestine, was alien to the larger part of German Jewry and aroused an opposition. The idea of Youth Aliyot had first and foremost appealed to the youth of Eastern European Jewry, especially to those in youth movements. Their parents, who had previously been forced once or even twice to take up the staff of the Wanderer, were quick to grasp the significance of events. So German Jews living in Germany of Eastern European origin had the wandering Jew in their bones. They knew what it was to pick up and leave when things got very difficult. Whereas the German Jews who had been comfortable and rooted for generations did not have that instinct. The first group of Youth Aliyot left Berlin on October 12, 1932. It was a small group of perhaps 12 young people, and they got Aliyah certificates from the director of the Ben Shemen Children's Village, and that's where they went. Fryer said they would pave the way for the liberation of the others. And then she went over the heads of all the Jewish organizations and went directly to the 18th Zionist Congress that met in August and September 1933. As a result of her bringing this idea to the Zionist Congress, Youth Aliyot became an official project of the World Zionist Organization. More groups of young people followed the first and left to Palestine and were dispersed there to cooperating youth villages, kibbutzim, moshavim, and agricultural schools. As the urgency of emigration from Germany grew, the demand for Palestine certificates for youth outstripped the supply. Does everybody know what a Palestine certificate is? No.
Okay.
The British controlled immigration to Palestine, and they limited it to 1,500 Jews a year at the request or the demand of the Arabs. At the Congress, they added a certain number of special certificates just for youth. So they weren't going to take jobs away, theoretically, from anybody. But even those certificates, the demand for the youth certificates quickly outstripped the supply of those that were available. Membership in Zionist youth organizations was growing rapidly, with many more applicants to Youth Aliyot. However, not all the applicants for Youth Aliyot were deemed sufficiently prepared for life in Palestine. It was not so simple to get a certificate for Youth Aliyot as it wasn't so simple to get a regular certificate. You had to come with your parents and be interviewed and tested on your knowledge of Hebrew, and they decided, is this person ready to live in the yishuv? Does he or she have the skills? Is the person's personality suitable for communal life on a kibbutz, for example? So they didn't take everybody right away. Sometimes you had to wait your turn. And while they were waiting, leaders of Youth Aliyot saw this as an opportunity to educate German Jewish youth about Jewish and Zionist life. We're talking about a very assimilated population who didn't know very much, if anything, about Jewish life. But here they were being persecuted for being Jews, and so that aroused interest in what is this Jewish thing. So the leaders of Youth Aliyot saw this as an opportunity to educate them in response about Jewish life and Zionism. What is Zionism? That's something else that they had to learn. Hebrew. They gave them basic knowledge of the Hebrew language and agricultural skills, because it makes no sense to send them to Palestine where they're going to work the land without any agricultural skills at all. In 1935, and this is still early in the story, in response to increased demand for Aliyah and in response to the dismissal of Jewish children from Germany's public schools, the Youth Aliyot broadened its project. A Youth Aliyot school was established in Berlin to give the youth a full year's training for life in Palestine. Hebrew was in the center of the curriculum. The main subjects were Jewish history, past and present, Zionism, the labor movement in Palestine, and science as far as it was connected to agriculture. In the midst of the daily degradation of life under the Nazis, and remember, these are children who were expelled from their schools and rejected by the friends with whom they had grown up. There was a crisis among young people because their whole environment had fallen apart around them. And the Youth Aliyot school became a haven for them of comfortable life in Judaism and teaching them its values and its worth. So children who were subjected to the destruction of morale and self-respect went to this school, which was permeated with the spirit of its first head, Franz Ohlendorf. He was a German Jew, a scientist, a Zionist, and a humanist. He had gone to Palestine in 1934, but he was persuaded to return to Germany to lead the Youth Aliyot school in Berlin that would prepare young people for Palestine. And it was understood that this was temporary, but he was uniquely qualified to head up this school. As the demands for Aliyah grew, it became apparent that all youth, regardless of their background, would benefit from preparatory training before their Aliyah. By 1935, Youth Aliyot had two schools in Berlin. One was affiliated with the Hechalutz Zionist youth movement. The other became known as the Youth Aliyot School in Berlin. In addition, the Zionist youth movements established 35 hachsharot, training farms, to accommodate those who were unable to emigrate immediately. These schools and farms accommodated Jewish children and youth who were dismissed from German public schools or who left them in order to escape from the daily humiliation and persecution they were experiencing. They gathered around a round table. On the white tablecloth was a pair of lit candles. The candles are on the either side of the picture of Herzl. Again, I apologize for the quality of the photographs, but you use what's available. 2 rolls instead of chalot. Some postcards with images of Eretz Yisrael and a Jewish flag. You can see the stripe there. That activity was not only enough, and you see the greenery, a branch of a tree or of a bush, to symbolize Shavuot. That activity was not only another tie to tradition, but it had the added symbolism of starting the counting of the Omer. And they decided to meet every day during the counting of the Omer to count together. So that was another symbol, the symbolism of counting the days until they hoped they would be free. For 7 weeks, whoever could get there met every night at dark for 15 minutes only, changing their meeting place frequently, in a public park, under the bridge, in the zoo, wherever it was deemed feasible. They stood in a circle, holding hands, humming, Hineni Muchanu Mzuman. You know what that is, right? It's the beginning of the Seder Sfirat HaOmer. That's the first sentence. Schwerzens would announce the day of the Omer. They would repeat it quietly, and then add the last sentence of Seder Sfirat HaOmer, Sheyibaneh Beit HaMikdash. So this is very symbolic, very heavy with laden with Jewish hopes and aspirations, and particularly relevant to their situation. In September 1943, one more of their number was arrested and held in the Gestapo prison, where he was tortured for information. The one who was arrested is the very tall fellow he's the third one in the middle of the ones who were standing. They got a smuggled note from him assuring them that he did not reveal anything, and that was the last they heard from him before he was deported to Auschwitz. And obviously did not reveal any information because nobody came after the rest of them.
The shock, yes, but this explosion of hatred, it was so overdramatic, I couldn't take it seriously. I remember I was working in the prison services. I was a social worker. I had my hat on. I was on my way out the door, and the director phoned, and he said, "You shouldn't come to work anymore." And I asked, "Why?" And he said, "You wouldn't be safe here anymore." And I remember thinking that was so funny. I mean, of all places, how could I not be safe in a prison?
Was he a Nazi?
I suppose so. I think that deep down many Germans disliked the Jews, but they kept their hatred bottled up, and then in 1933, pop, the lid came off.